means, and len means taking. And together, I was reading actually that when the Tibetan language uses words, they have these two separate words, the sending and the taking. But actually, when they join those in the word Tonglen, it changes the word to mean something slightly different. And the way it translates, actually, Tonglen starts to translate as exchange. So it's taking the two words of taking and sending to actually mean the word exchange is probably the closer word that you will get. So the Tonglen teachings, they come from the Lojong teachings, and the Lojong teachings are a set of practices or a set of trainings to train the mind and the heart and how to stay open and present. And they were passed down from a teacher in the 10th century. He went and taught the teachings. He took the teachings to Tibet, and I always love the story of how the teachings arrived in Tibet from a teacher. And it said that when he was asked to come to Tibet to give these teachings, that he had heard that the Tibetan people were really kind and people, and he thought, well, this is no good for my practice. Who am I going to practice with? So he ended up taking his bad-tempered cook, or some translations are his bad-tempered tea boy, with him, so that he had somebody to practice with. So he had someone to practice patience with. Turns out that when he ended up in Tibet, he found out that people were just the same as they were in India, and he needn't have bothered taking his tea boy with him. But I think this kind of gives a flavour of, what the teachings are about. They're really about how we can start to use our environment and the people around us as a way of training. What we have a tendency or a habit to do, which is the cause of our suffering, really, in essence, is to want to get rid of that which is difficult and bring towards us that which is pleasant and nice. We want happiness, and we don't want suffering. So they originated from a teacher, and I'd like to give the lineage because it's really helpful in terms of understanding how these teachings have arrived where they are and where the Lojong is situated in terms of the Dharma. So they were passed down through a teacher to John Topa, and then to his student Gesh Patawa. And then they came to Langri Tangpa, and Langri Tangpa is also quite a famous scholar. So he turned the Lojong teachings into a very concise text called the 8 Verses of Happiness. I don't know if any of you have come across this, but it's an incredible text. And this also gives a real good flavour of Tonglen, or the practice of Tonglen itself. I don't want to go too much detail into that text now, but it's a really beautiful text if you ever come across it or want to read it. But the 7th verse is, in brief, directly or indirectly, I will offer help and happiness to all my mothers, and secretly take upon myself all their hurt and suffering. So this is kind of like the first mention that we find in the Buddhist text of the practice of Tonglen. So from Langri Tangpa, he passed these teachings on to his student Gesh Shawara, and then they come to Gesh Chikawa, which also you find his Lojong slogans are quite famous. So there's 59 of these pith instructions, but they're really also amazing. You can get sets of cards for them. I don't know if you practice these in this group, but they're great slogans to just remind yourself you can use them every day or every week. So there's 3 slogans there in the 59 set of slogans that point towards this Tonglen practice. So the first one is, it says sending and taking should be practiced alternately. These two should ride the breath. And then the 10th slogan is, begin the sequence of sending and taking with yourself. Geshe Chikawa then passed it on to his student, Ladingpa, and then on to Tokme Zongpo. And Tokme Zongpo is actually the author of, well, this book's written is a commentary by Ken MacLeod, but he's the author of 37 Practices of the Bodhisattva. So also a fantastic, amazing read. And Ken MacLeod gives a particularly good commentary on it, so I recommend that to everybody. So that's really kind of the body of text that encompasses the Lojong teachings, which Tonglen is the practice, I'd say probably the main practice within the Lojong teachings. So it sits within the body of Mahayana practices. So this is a way of cultivating our compassionate heart, or bodhicitta. And this is also separated into two strands. One strand is absolute bodhicitta, or the wisdom aspect of compassion, or training the heart and mind to be open. And the other one is the relative bodhicitta, or the compassion aspect of this. So it's more how we practice with other people. So the wisdom aspect really speaks to, I guess, the root teaching from the Buddha on where suffering comes from. You know, what is it that causes our suffering here? And our suffering comes really from our attraction, our aversion, and our indifference. So that means we're attracted, or we really want things that are happy and joyful, things that are pleasurable, and we want to push away anything. So the aversion, or push away anything that's difficult, we don't like, causes pain and difficulty for ourselves. We want to kind of get rid of that. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff that actually we don't really care about, we're indifferent to. So what we can see is that if we sit with basic mindfulness, so the basic practice of the Buddhist teachings is this practice of mindfulness. If we start to sit in mindfulness, we start to notice that our thoughts aren't particularly solid, and they're also not permanent. So we might have a thought for one moment, and then the next minute the thought moves on. So these things are considered the wisdom aspect of the teaching, or the absolute bodhicitta. It's starting to see the transparency of thought itself, starting to penetrate and cut straight through that. Now, this is really important when it comes to the practice of Tonglen, or understanding really the basis in which Tonglen is practiced, because we start with this understanding that thought doesn't really exist, that there is no solidity to our thoughts themselves. So we practice this usually in mindfulness. But then what we also encounter in our mindfulness practice is we start to encounter our emotions as well as our thoughts. And these become a little bit more sticky. They have a little bit more power to them, a little bit more hooked quality to them. So it kind of grabs us a little bit more. So the Tonglen practice is starting from a basis of understanding that our thoughts are not solid. And how then can we work with emotions that are a little bit more tricky to thoughts? When we deeply penetrate emotions, what we find is that the emotions themselves are just made up of sensation, a physical sensation that's happening in the body, coupled with a thought. But how do we get to that kind of realization? How do we get to that understanding? Well, first of all, we have to start to learn how to sit with emotion. So the Tonglen is a way really of beginning to approach the emotion to begin with. You start to be able to approach the emotion that we don't really want to approach. something that we find really difficult. So these emotions, we all have them: anger, jealousy, hatred, sadness, all the things that we really want to get rid of. It's like, well, how do I begin to start to approach them? So Tonglen reverses the logic that we normally have that says that we want to push everything away that's difficult and pull everything towards us that's pleasurable. It starts to undo that by reversing that kind of logic. So the practice is by taking in the things that we find difficult, or bringing those things closer to us and pushing away or giving away, offering out those things that we find really pleasurable. So it's kind of the opposite to our natural tendency. When we sit with the breath, we're able to kind of see through and cut through the thoughts that we see, but we get to struggle much more when an emotion arises. So the first thing, as I said, is to begin to touch into that emotion deeply. So we want to bring it in closer to be able to touch into it deeply. When we come into contact with it more deeply, it allows us to see into the nature of emotion the same way as we can see into the nature of thought. So I wanted to read a little bit from this book from Trungpa, because he puts it very nicely in terms of how we can begin to use Tonglen. So it says, he says, Tonglen should not be used as any kind of antidote. You do not do it and then wait for the effect. You just do it and drop it. It doesn't matter whether it works or not. If it works, you breathe that out. If it does not work, you breathe that in. So you do not possess anything. That is the point. Usually, you would like to hold on to your goodness. You would like to make a fence around yourself and put everything bad outside of it. Foreigners, your neighbors, or what you have. You don't want them to come in. You don't even want your neighbors to walk their dogs on your property, because they might make a mess of your lawn. So in ordinary samsaric life, you don't send and receive at all. You try as much as possible to guard those pleasant little situations you have created for yourself. You try to put them in a vacuum like fruit in a tin, completely purified and clean. You try to hold on to as much or as you can, and anything outside your territory is regarded as altogether problematic. You don't want to catch the local influenza or your local diarrhea attack that is going around. You are constantly trying to ward off as much as you can. You may not have enough money to build a castle or a wall around you, but your front door is very reliable. You are always putting double locks on it. Even when you check into a hotel, the management always tell you to double lock your door and never let anyone come in unless you check them out first. That will probably tell you the whole thing. Aren't we crazy? So I think, we all have this tendency of really wanting to shut out what we don't want. But the practice of Tonglen is beginning to undercut that by beginning to allow in much more. So from a relative bodhicitta aspect, when we start to sit with our own emotions in this way and start to contact them, we start to see that they're nothing more than just sensation, and coupled with our thoughts, which we know actually don't have a duration and they don't have any permanence. And when we're able to allow in a lot more, it kind of touches our heart, and our heart starts to open up a little bit. It starts to tenderize. So Garchen Rinpoche often says that we're like ice cubes floating on the ocean. We're still made of the same water, but we're frozen. We've frozen ourselves into solid little lumps. And he says that when we start to practice compassion, these ice cubes begin to melt. So it's starting to really contact our heart, it starts to tenderize our heart when we come in contact with our own emotion, when we stop pushing them away. Naturally, there's a passion already within us, so it allows us to really be able to touch into that compassionate heart that's already there. The practice of Tonglen usually has 4 stages. So one of the first stages is a flash of openness. And this flash of openness is connecting directly into that softness of heart, or that gentleness that comes from sitting directly with your own emotion. When we then start to encounter other people's suffering and their difficulty, because we've had this tenderness of our own heart, it allows us to then be able to connect more deeply with other people. It allows us to notice how they're also carrying this delusion that their emotions and their thoughts are solid and real. And this further tenderizes our own heart. It opens our heart even more. So this whole process, both on a relative scale and an absolute scale, is constantly allowing the heart to be opened, expanded. So we start with this flash of openness, and this can come from our own experience. It can come from our ability to touch into what it feels like when we're able to let go of thought, which most of us have already experienced when we do our basic mindfulness practice. So it's helpful to just have a sense of that before we even start the Tonglen practice. The second part is really getting into the visualization practice. Tibetan people are very visual, so they use a lot of visualization as a way of practice. But not everybody in the West is very visual, so it's really helpful to try and connect this Tonglen practice to our own experience. So when we're feeling overwhelmed, or when we're feeling pressure, angry, what does this feel like in our body? So again, this kind of understanding can really come from our own mindfulness practice. When we begin to touch into how our emotions feel, what does it feel like in my body when I feel angry? What does it feel like when I'm stressed or tense or overwhelmed or overcome by pain or suffering, or I feel sick and I don't want to go out, or when all of these things are happening to us, what's our own experience of that? So we're really getting into the texture and the feeling of this. So Lama Lina uses this other word that I really like, and it's more helpful for me because I'm not a very visual person, but she says we can create a feelization, which I think is really helpful. So it's really getting in contact with, well, what's the texture of this? And then when we're able to drop this, or when we're feeling open and happy or satisfied from our practice, maybe we've had a really good meditation session and we get up off our cushion and we go out into the world and we feel really open and present in the world. What does that feel like? What does the texture of that feel like? Can I bring that in? So the traditional Tonglen practice works with visualization, and what they visualize is suffering and tense, difficulty, constriction. They visualize this in the form of thick, dense smoke. So imagine just being in this really claustrophobic room. You remember what pubs might have been like before when they allowed smoking, this real thick, dense smoke. And it's making you feel like choking, or someone else said it's like the black sooty smoke that comes out the back of a diesel bus. It's like breathing that in. So this is the visualization. And then when we breathe out, what we're breathing out is some kind of white, clear light. But as I said, not all of us are very visual, so we can get into how this feels texturally rather than as a visual image. So it could be somebody once described the claustrophobia that we might feel from breathing in this thick, dense smoke as perhaps what it feels like to be on London Underground in rush hour traffic. You know, you're all squashed in, there's no room, there's no air to breathe, it's so hot. So whatever that is, but it's useful to find that within your own experience, you know, so we can really get a feel of this tightness, this constriction, how it feels when we're suffering, when we're experiencing these really difficult emotions. How does that feel for you? And then the openness is like somebody opening a fresh air, a window with fresh air come rushing in, or however you're experiencing that. So the second part of this practice is then to get in contact with the texture of this experience. You know, what is it like to breathe in this thick, dense smoke, this claustrophobia, and what is it like to let go or offer out this freshness. We can also say that the freshness is our realization, you know, our spaciousness, our reward, our satisfaction, our success, whatever it is that we're wanting to cling onto, we can allow that to go out to others. The third stage is then to get in contact with a heartfelt situation. So this is a more immediate situation. So this could be your own suffering, something that's going on for you in this moment, some difficulty that you're experiencing, or a difficulty that maybe a loved one is experiencing. Often we experience our loved ones very closely to ourselves, similar to how we hold our own selves. So we can equate both of those two together here. And here we're getting in contact with the suffering of either ourselves or those that we're really close to. And we begin to breathe their suffering in the same way. Breathing that in, offering them out some kind of relief from their suffering or spaciousness. And then the fourth stage is beginning to expand that circle of how we're practicing, and we expand that out to more neutral people, strangers, people we don't really know, you know, and or the people that we're indifferent to, and then expanding it out further to those that we find more difficult or who we suspect are the cause of our suffering, those people we blame in society. We can start to expand it out to those too. So what I want to do is I want to lead a guided practice. Now I'm aware there's only a 40-minute limit on the Zoom. So what I want to do is I want to guide the practice, and at the end of the practice it might be that the Zoom ends. I think there'll be a 10-minute gap there. For people on Zoom, if you want to use that 10 minutes as a reflection period, just to perhaps you want to write it down or just silently contemplate how that practice was for you. And then the people in the room will do a paired exercise where we can discuss how the practice went. And then after 10 minutes, we can come back and have some kind of feedback with question and answers. Does that sound okay with everyone? Is everyone okay with that? Yeah. Yeah. Great. So I'll guide a Tonglen practice now. So again, just feeling into the ground, the space that's around you. Feeling your body, your heart, checking your posture. Just paying attention to the sensation of the breath as it comes and goes. And as this is a visualization practice, you might want to just gently close the eyes. So we just start the practice with a flash of openness. So having a sense of wide open sky. It's useful if we can connect this to our own experience of openness. And then beginning to connect with the texture. So having a sense of how it feels for you when you're experiencing difficulty, suffering, having a sense of tightness, constriction, claustrophobia, perhaps heat. Checking into the feeling. A feeling of wanting to escape this. Instead, we can visualize this feeling in the form of thick, dense smoke. And on the in-breath, we take this in. So we're welcoming in this claustrophobia, this constriction, this tightness. And when we breathe it in, we breathe it into the heart center, middle of our chest. In the heart center, thick, dense smoke causes the heart to expand, to crack open, breaks the armor of the heart. Notice that the suffering, the pain, the difficulty just begins to dissolve. Actually has no substance. And so it transforms into cool, clean air, or a sense of openness, freshness, freedom from fixed mind. And instead of holding on to this, we offer it out. So we breathe this feeling of freedom, of openness, of spaciousness out into the world. And then we allow this to just ride the breath. So breathing in the thick, dense smoke, suffering, the constriction. Breathing out cool, clean air, freshness, spaciousness, openness. And just allow this to ride the breath. And bringing to mind a specific time when we felt suffering. And it's useful if there's something that's present right now. It could be a pain, sickness, difficult emotion. Perhaps bringing to mind something that happened within this last week. Really feeling into this. So really getting a sense of this tightness, this constriction. How does this particular suffering feel? Visualizing this as thick, dense smoke and breathing it into the heart center, taking it in. Heart expands and opens. Experience relief, spaciousness, openness. Breathing that out, offering it to all sentient beings. Breathing in our suffering, our difficulty, our pain. Breathing it into the heart center. Breathing out cool, clean air, freshness, spaciousness, freedom from fixed mind. Bringing to mind another being, could be a loved one, friend, somebody who experiences similar difficulty to the one that we're feeling ourselves. It's good to relate these two. Noticing that I'm not alone. Other people experience this. My loved ones experience this. Simultaneous to our own, breathing in their suffering too into the heart center. Breathing out relief. Offering our loved one freedom, cessation from their difficulties. So taking in their difficulties into our own heart, breathing out freedom. Not just our loved ones experience this suffering, other beings in the world experiencing this. Taking in their suffering too, breathing it in. Take it all into the heart center, expanding the heart till it cracks wide open. Breathing out freshness, spaciousness, openness, offering it out to all beings. Breathing in the suffering, the pain, the difficulty of all beings, even the ones we find difficult. Breathing that in into our heart, allowing it to fuel this bodhicitta. Breathing out spaciousness, warmth, comfort, compassion. Breathe it all out. And we just drop the practice. Just let go. Back to the body. Feel the ground. Feel the space. Just rest. Just rest for a moment or two. Just taking a moment to stretch. So we've got 10 minutes before the people on Zoom come back in, so I thought it'd be quite nice. I don't know who was here last time when I taught, but we've paired up.
Me too.
So it'd be quite nice if you paired up with someone. I think, yeah, there'll be one group of 3. So, and then you can just have more of an informal discussion with each other. But the question really is, what was that experience like for me in that practice? What did I experience in that practice? So we'll perhaps have 10 minutes. You can take turns if you want to. It's good to allow people to have a bit of an open space when you're talking. If you have a tendency to talk a lot, perhaps notice that, hold back a little bit. If you have a tendency